Thanks, and welcome. Great to see you in so large numbers. You've probably never heard about Datalicious, so quick introduction about who we actually are. This is us, our elevator pitch. We use data to fatten the funnel, to push more people into that conversion funnel of yours and push more people through. And we do a whole bunch of data analytics services. We build our own technology, develop our own software. But today what I want to talk to you about is that very top bit of the funnel, the media attribution, media mix modeling part. Like, how do you figure out if you have a limited marketing budget to split that up into the right chunks and allocate it to the right channels to maximize the overall return on marketing investment for you guys? Now, we're originally from Australia, so we work with a lot of clients across various different verticals. But there's a couple of brands in there that you may have not seen before unless you've traveled to Australia. But I'd like to think there's a few international ones on there that you recognize. As I said, we come originally from Australia. I started the company 10 years ago in Sydney, but now we're expanding into Southeast Asia and also into Europe. And really today is all about telling you about Datalicious, and hopefully we can snatch up a few clients. Now, the next slide is a little bit of a shoulder clap slide, and apologies for putting it in. My team made me. I guess the message here is we're actually kind of a big deal in Australia, but nobody's ever heard of us in Europe. So as you can see, in Southeast Asia, we're actually the third largest attribution provider right after Adobe and Google. If people have more customized needs, they want a little bit more love, then they come to Datalicious. So today, what I want to talk to you about is really this statement. A lot of people have probably heard it already. Commonly misattributed to Henry Ford, but it's actually a guy called John Wanamaker. And that's really what media attribution is all about, at least in the initial stage. Finding out those placements, those ad placements, those channels, those investments that are actually wasted. They do nothing for generating a conversion. Can I find these placements that never participate in a successful converting path and get rid of them? Yeah? And on average, funnily enough, we find between 10 to 30% of media spend could be slashed in the first year after doing attribution, and you would sell exactly the same. That gives you a rough idea of potential ROI for media attribution. Now, I want to paint a little picture today of the marketing measurement nirvana, like what do we actually want to look at? What are the kind of reports that we can expect if we do attribution, okay? And then I also want to run you through a bit of a study that we did, again, in Australia, but it's a really, really big study. It's actually the biggest attribution study in the world. And I want to show you some results from that study to give you an idea of how results can change when you go from something like last click attribution to custom attribution. So what we're working towards is a chart like this. I want to be able to show you for every single channel, how much money did you put in, how much money did that generate, and what's the actual ROI on that investment. Yeah? There should be no other media report that you look at. I don't care about clicks or visitors or conversions. None of that matters. It's about the money that you put in, the money that you get out, and the ROI figure in between. And if you have a list or you have a report like this, it suddenly becomes pretty obvious how you shift your money around. You're not going to turn offline off. It has a place in the media mix. But maybe you want to shift a few dollars from here into online if this is the picture that you get back from your reports. Yeah? And obviously, we can look at this at various different levels of granularity. This is just one example. This is the kind of report that we want to produce. Yeah? Moving away from last click and conversion thinking to custom attribution, multi-channel, multi-touch attribution, and reporting on ROI. We've done a whole bunch of surveys together with e-consultancy and research on our own. So I'm going to share a couple of results with you so you can see what other marketers actually think about this topic. If you think about where the budgets of your company go, if you think about the size of media, paid media, or marketing investment, that is probably one of the largest chunks that your company invests money in to generate revenue. So figuring out how to optimize that is probably a big deal and should be on everybody's mind. And hopefully that's why the room is full today, and not because you have nothing better to do. Now, another thing that we often hear is, oh, look, especially from agencies, I'm worried if we put attribution in, people will reduce their spend. And the exact opposite happens. Most people actually start investing more money into all channels. Yeah? It's not about turning things off. Yeah? Once you can see how much ROI you're getting, for every dollar you put in, you get $2 back. It becomes a no-brainer to say, well, let's put in more dollars, right? So the example that I've given in the beginning where I said you can turn off advertising and you sell exactly the same is just a way of explaining the potential ROI because it's easy to understand. But what happens in reality is people start investing more and more and more because they can see for every dollar they put in, they get more money back. Now, before we talk a bit more about these results from our attribution study that we did, I want to just go through some of the basics of attribution so we all know what we're talking about. So different attribution approaches, really. There's the famous, so what we're talking about here is the path to purchase, touch points leading up to a conversion. Yeah? And then in that path, we can allocate credit in different ways, and that's what we call attribution. Yeah? There is a very, very common attribution model called the last click model, where you give all credit for the conversion to the very last touch point, which tends to be paid search, organic search. You probably know that very well. That is also called attribution. It's just one way of attributing credit, giving credit to the very last touch point. There's a couple of others, like first touch, giving all the credit to the very first touch point doesn't make a lot of sense either. Both of those models neglect a whole bunch of different touch points in the middle or at the beginning, who also were necessary to create a conversion, so we have to give them some credit, otherwise we're neglecting them. Then there's a very common model called even attribution, which kind of doesn't make a lot of sense either, because a display ad impression, somebody just looking at something, can never be worth as much as somebody actually clicking on a search ad. That's an engagement, much more engaged, should be worth more, right? So even attribution, also rubbish, makes no sense. There's a whole bunch of others. Really what we're aiming for is what we call custom or algorithmic attribution. We have to calculate an attribution model, a custom attribution model for every single client, because all of you guys are different products, different pricing, different campaigns, different seasonality, different competitive activity. I could go on. There's so many differences between different companies, it's not possible to just pick one attribution model across clients. And most of the marketers agree. What is the most effective way of attributing? It's creating your own custom model, yeah, with a large margin. Now, what I want to talk about today is what happens when you go from this last click model, all credit going to the very last touch point, to actually implementing attribution and giving custom credit to every single touch point involved. What happens? Like, what's the big deal about this? Why can't I just stand with last click? Okay? That's what this presentation is mainly about. And we've done a massive study on that in Australia. So we collected across these 7 different financial service brands, insurance, banking. We collected 700 million touch points across 100 million purchase paths, 75,000 conversions. It's a massive data set, yeah? It's the biggest attribution study done globally. Unfortunately, it's just in Australia, but I believe consumer behavior in Australia and the UK is probably not that different. We're all addicted to our smartphones and so on. So results are probably, they would be different here, but they would at least give you an idea of what trends might look like over here. Okay? Now, before I show you some of these results, I want to quickly tell you how we actually calculate these custom attribution models so you understand the mechanics behind that. And everybody does that the same way. There is no specific, super innovative way of doing that. Everybody that offers attribution has about 5 different statistical ways of calculating an attribution model. But basically what happens underneath is you have millions of paths, Some of these paths have a successful endpoint. There is a conversion in that path, the green bit here, which we call successfully converting path. The great majority, unfortunately, has a red endpoint. They have no conversion. They are unsuccessful, non-converting path. Yeah? 99% of paths are these. What we now do is we use statistical models like regression, Shapley, to compare these 2 different path types. And we basically look for patterns. Are there certain channels, creatives, touch points that more often show up in converting path than non-converting path? It's just looking for patterns and using statistical methods for that have been around for a very long time. So this is what we've done. We recorded 100 million purchase paths. We compared all these paths together and calculated a custom model specifically for that study. The biggest thing that we found is that display is influencing other channels. So if you think about a display ad, anybody in the room who's ever clicked on a display ad? Like 5 hands, yeah? Nobody ever does, right? Like, who cares? I look at these things. They fly around me all the time, but I never click on them. So if you never click on them, how on earth can they ever be the last click in a last click attribution model? It simply doesn't work, yeah? It's like any other display advertising, outdoor, TV, radio, it's an exposure. You're getting exposed to an idea, to an ad, to a creative, and it leaves an impression in your mind. And maybe a few days later, you do something, you action, you respond. You may respond by doing a search. You may respond by going to the advertiser's website directly, yeah? It leaves an impression, but it's not necessarily a click. In fact, the tiny, tiny minority of cases, it is actually a click. So once we apply custom attribution and we're giving credit to every single part of this path, which also includes mere impressions, not just clicks, then suddenly display gets a lot more credit, okay? In fact, almost 10 times more. So if we only look at click-through rates for display, that would be the response rate. Once we include indirect responses, as in display leading to a search immediately after, or display leading to a direct website visit, all very close together, like within a few minutes of the display ads happening, we can actually calculate a response rate for display that's 9 times, almost 10 times higher than you actually think it is. Okay? So that was the first big outcome. The second question, or the second comment that we often get is, oh, look, it doesn't matter. I'll put all my money into search. Sooner or later, everybody's going to search. Why would I invest my money into anything else? I just put my money into the bottom of the funnel. Sooner or later, everybody's going to end up at that bottom of the funnel, and I'm going to catch them if I put money into paid search. Not true. One of the things that we found is that there's a lot of, every channel is driving unique audience, eyeballs that you would have not reached otherwise. So here's a bit of a breakdown of all paths recorded as part of the study. Only about 25% of paths were actually true multi-channel paths that involved every single channel. 34% were paths that only had paid search in it. So I'm not just saying one touch point in search, I'm saying multiple paid search touch points, but it's only 34%. So if you only put money into paid search, then you would be missing out on all these other eyeballs that actually only got exposed to email, only got exposed to display, or only got exposed to Facebook display. Little caveat here, Facebook actually helped us pay for this attribution study. It picked up part of the tab. I guarantee you the insights are independent, but that's why you see Facebook popping up more often than other display advertisers. So every channel driving unique audience, and we can see that, again, because we can see the entire path. Yeah? One of the things we also saw then, obviously, in the end is if display never generates a click, well, what happens to display driving conversions? Yes, the answer is yes. Display drives conversions, even though there never is a click, there's no engagement. We can see that paths that have display ads in them, on average, convert 7 to 8 times better than paths that do not have display ads in. Okay? And funnily enough, this frequency is also very different for the types of display advertising. Yeah? So in certain display types, you need a lot less impressions to achieve that result. In other display types, you need a lot more. Retargeting, less. Contextual, more, for example. Right? So this is not, there's also various different levels of granularity to this at the end. Once we put all these insights together, the biggest problem that we find is that channels get over and undervalued. If you get all the credit in the wrong model, then you tend to look really awesome. As in, you generate all the conversions. So people give you more and more money. Yeah? And the other channels, even though they're involved in the conversion, they don't look good in reports, so they get less and less money. And so you end up with a very imbalanced media mix. Yeah? And it can be a really, really big issue because these things are not, the problem is not you're doing it once, you're doing it again and again and again every time you look in the report, so it becomes a compounding issue. You've done that for years. Last click's been around for 10, 15 years. So probably a lot of the people that are using last click attribution have by now ended up with a very bastardized media mix. And so when we compare what happens when we go from last click to even attribution, one of the things that we find is that certain channels pick up a lot more credit for revenue. Yeah? So display retargeting is probably the biggest winner, 2,300% more in terms of credit for revenue once attribution, proper multi-touch attribution is implemented, when you move from last click to multi-touch attribution. Display channels on average get an extra 800%, 830% credit for revenue. Now, those are massive figures, right? And this is where I think you need to think about attribution as a real competitive advantage as well. Now imagine your competition is not doing multi-touch attribution. They don't know this. They don't know that display advertising is actually performing 800% better than you think, or any other channel. Yeah? I know we're talking a lot about display, but these imbalances can happen with anything else. Keep in mind that this is always custom for each client. But think, you're the only person that knows that display performs 800% better than everybody else thinks. Now you start pouring money into that channel. That means you're going to get more eyeballs, you're going to get more attention. You sooner or later are going to start taking over market share from your competitors. This is not just a day-to-day optimization game. If you get into this early, this can also turn into a significant competitive advantage. Once we put this all together into a nice chart, we can see how big this imbalance can be. So at the bottom here, we have the typical share of spend The further to the right, the bigger the share of the spend. On the left-hand side, we have the typical return on ad spend. The higher up, the more return on ad spend. Over here, we have the other display, paid search. So getting a lot of money, a lot of budget. Return on ad spend fairly low. Display Facebook, much higher return on ad spend, but at the same time, lower share of the budget. Retargeting, highest return on ad spend, but the lowest share of the budget. Obviously, that doesn't make any sense. You kind of want these dots to be a lot closer grouped together, more balanced, okay? And that's exactly what we're trying to fix with media attribution. Trying to create a balanced media mix so every channel gets the right amount of spend. So your overall spend is producing overall the highest possible return on ad spend. This imbalance happens across channels, but it also happens within channels. So when you go down another layer of granularity. So here, forget the top bit, forget this stuff on the right a little bit. These are different return on ad spends for different type of display activities, right? So Facebook, retargeting, performance, and so forth. The dotted line is the magical $1 return on ad spend. So for every dollar you put in, you at least get $1 back. If you left off that line, you're kind of screwed. You're actually losing money. If you're right at that line, you're making money, okay? In this example here, for example, display contextual, for every dollar you put in, you actually only get 40 cents back, right? So again, there's an imbalance within the display channel. You can probably take some of this money, move it over here, or renegotiate. It's not always a question of moving money around. Sometimes it's as simple as reducing the price, because ROI is a function of cost and revenue, right? So either you make more money, or you negotiate this guy down, and you could potentially go into positive ROI. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can start actioning these insights. But what we're trying to do is balance this out. So what we've done with eConsultancy, and this research is about release. It's a global study, so it has UK data in it, and data from other European countries as well. And basically what we're comparing here is we're comparing the amount of money spent in different channels versus the amount of time spent by consumers in that channel. Because we thought that would be a nice little view of imbalance, right? I mean, we're marketers. We're supposed to spend our money where consumers spend their time, because that's where we want to engage with them. So that might be a really simple way of looking at it. And so what we found for the UK data is there's an 11% mismatch, or imbalance as we call it, between online and offline. People spend way more time online, or at least, not way more, but same as offline, but offline gets a lot more money than online. So that in our mind doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's something we can attack with attribution, implementing that for advertisers and then figuring out where, for that particular brand, these imbalances are across channels, within channels, and then shifting money around and helping to overall optimize. Yeah? And the outcome of that really is mostly display advertising tends to get more money, paid search tends to get more money, yeah? All channels tend to get more money. As soon as you find out, as soon as you get visibility of the ROI for your different investments, it becomes a no-brainer. Yeah? We even have one client now in Australia that has a fluid advertising budget. There is no budget anymore for advertising. As long as there's positive ROI, they get more money the next month. Yeah? And that's really what you want to do. Now, obviously, we have a solution for this. We call that the Optima Hub. And it's basically our own attribution platform. Allows you to visualize in real time what's going on, what the ROI is between your different channels. We have spend optimizers. You can put in your media budget or your desired amount of conversions or sales that you want, and we will tell you the optimal spend mix at any given time. You can evaluate the path and have a look at how these purchase paths look like. Yeah, it can also help you with creating strategies of how to best engage with consumers. You can explore the different models and see how they change from last click to even attribution. We can even combine this with an econometric model and combine online and offline together and give you the full picture of ROI across online and offline channels in one neat report. Yeah? And if you don't have a tag manager yet, we'll throw that in. Tag management and data collection is super important as part of media attribution. So as part of all of our attribution projects, we tend to take over the client's tag management for free, essentially. Because if the data that's collected is not up to scratch, then the data that comes out at the end, the reports that come out at the end, don't work. So the Optima Hub works with any tag manager that you have in place already, or we'll give you our own. Quick summary of the USPs. So we're completely independent. We have no interest whatsoever. We don't buy, sell media. I will tell you exactly what it is. It's a completely transparent white box architecture. It's built on Amazon. You get your own Redshift instance. You can add columns. You can add tables. You can play around with it. You have full access to your raw data. You can take it out, do something else with it, feed it into your CRM. All these things are possible. We use Kinesis data streaming, so it's all real time. As soon as the conversion happens, we calculate the path, so you could even use the data to inform campaigns. And the most important thing, it's a flat fee, full service model. We make sure that you get all the services required with the technology, so you get some value out of it. Come get a demo. This is how our stand looks like. We're at the bottom, somewhere over there. I'm not quite orientated yet, but I think it's over there. Thanks, guys. Any questions?
Is there any questions from the audience?
Hi there, I'm George from Virgin Trains. I just got a quick question. Is there a way to overlay viewability into the attribution model? Because if a display ad isn't seen, it can't really be kind of attributed.
Yeah, there is. We have a script for that. There's plenty of different providers, so we can either use your existing viewability provider, include that data, or you can use our script. So very possible. Just keep in mind that's browser dependent. So some of these viewability scripts only work on certain browsers. I think you can't get it to work on Safari, for example. So you're always relegated to tracking viewability on a certain sample of data and then applying it back to the whole. But yes, you can.
Should we go for the one at the top?
Yeah.
How does consumer decision-making, how does the consumer decision-making process differ for different types of purchase?
Basic resourcing requirements internally. That's a good question.
Okay.
So we'd like to take over the technology. That's what we're really good at. The implementation, maintenance of data collection, data processing, throw in some analyst hours. But what would be very, very helpful, and all the successful projects that we ran always had that, is an internal analytics lead. You have to have someone in your organization that understands this data, really works with us to create the model, because you have a lot of inherent company knowledge that helps us tune the model, and then work with the model and get it into the organization, because it's a real cultural change going from conversion reporting to ROI reporting, and you have to get that out. So an internal owner, ideally a sort of strategist, lead analytics person, that's probably the most important thing to have, yeah? Unless you want to rebuild the whole thing internally yourself and do everything yourself. Then you need developers and technicians and whatnot.
And how do you track organic social engagement?
Okay. Very difficult to track. What we tend to do is when people log in, or you have an identification point where you collect an email, when people click on an email, when people sign up for your services or log in with their email account, what we tend to do is we take these email addresses and go off to a third-party provider and wash them against their database. We get all their social identifiers returned from these particular individuals, and then we buy that social media data and we try to overlay it and inject it into the purchase path. Again, that can't be done for everybody, but we can do it usually for a sufficient enough sample to then extrapolate back to the whole.
Do you want to take the one below? Can you track cross-device journeys?
Yes, you can. Again, very difficult. So first thing, the way we do it is called deterministic. That means I need someone to actually click on an email on both devices, log in on both devices, fill in a form on both devices. I need the same identification point across both devices. If we have that in the journey, we can automatically, we already do that, automatically fuse the paths together and create the full cross-device path. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. There is certain things called probabilistic ID matching, where people think they have seen the same user and match the path together. That stuff simply doesn't work. Unless you're a travel provider where you book the same flight at the same time, same date, on the same airline with the same price on 2 different devices within the same 2 minutes, I don't see any of this stuff working. We haven't seen it working yet. So we need identification points, and then we can fuse these parts together for a small sample, and then we extrapolate back to the whole. Sorry.
Let me bring you there. You could just say where you're from.
Hello, Marques Niemeyer from BSH Home Appliances. Relating to different devices, maybe a little bit different. Multi-screen, can you do anything in terms of looking at what TV advertising produces in terms of effect on online user journeys?
So unless you're a telco that has its own TV station and you can match the ad impression directly back to the customer, you're relegated to using econometric modeling. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to pick up, there's a TV ad, you're announcing something, you're advertising something, it will generate a response spike, yeah? Maybe even a higher response spike if we use like a unique search call to action or something, but we see a spike. We then try to, in our data, in our attribution purchase path data, and we then use econometric modeling to try to match those spikes to the necessary TV tabs or TV spots. So yes, can be done, but it's not an individual purchase path anymore. It becomes a modeling exercise. Yeah.
Brilliant. I'm really sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. We've now, so just leave me to thank Christian.
We're downstairs. If you have any questions, come by.
There we go.